while people are talking about climate change, we are already offering grant funding to these small island states to look at issues like early warning, coastal infrastructure, water management, etc.
Welcome to this edition of Sustainability Karma. I'm your host Rajiv Tikoo. Today we have a very special guest with us, Amit Prothi. He's Director General of Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, or CDRI as it's known. CDRI is a coalition of governments, UN agencies, private sector, and academia. Welcome, Amit Prothi, to this edition of Sustainability Karma.
Thank you so much for having me, Mr. Tikoo.
Thank you. CDRI was very active at COP29 in Baku. What was your agenda?
Rajiv, this is a very new topic for a lot of people. Think about resilient infrastructure, disaster resilient infrastructure. It's not something that is easily understood, particularly in the climate discussions. And we've been participating in COP since the last 3 years now, and we've been in different. We never had a pavilion. We were in different pavilions. We were in partner pavilions, member country pavilions. This time, for the first time, we decided to have our own pavilion. So we wanted to be on the ground, essentially showing to everybody out there that we are leading this discussion on disaster resilient infrastructure. And so that allows us in a way to put the footprint of the coalition in such kinds of conferences. And I have to say, the visibility that we had so many people stopping by our stall asking us, what is CDRI? What do you guys do? Why is this incredibly important? Wow, why is my country not a member? Or why is my country a member? So I think just by having that presence through a pavilion allowed us to be more visible. At the same time, we organized a lot of sessions, bringing in partners, bringing in experts, bringing in country members to talk about the importance of the agenda. And, we got some very good highlights out of those 2 weeks that the COPs took place. We had, I think, around 38 sessions that we organized at COP, we and partners.
While as you're an international coalition, but would you say that Baku really marked your arrival on the global stage in a big way?
It did. We've been working hard to build up, both the secretariat, the kinds of work we are doing, bringing it to a global audience. But we've done it through others. We've done it, by participating in forums that are organized by others. Baku was the first time we had a presence on the ground. So there was somebody from CDRI visible from morning to night. And, it's little in terms of sometimes hard to describe, but just having that presence, the footfall that went by, we had prime ministers stopping by. We had a movie star in our pavilion. We had quite a few high-level dignitaries who either they were members or they were not members, but they stopped by to sort of ask, what is this coalition? And what resonated very well was, it seems like we are really talking about the agenda that matters a lot to lots of countries. DRI, really resonated a lot with people saying, I'd never thought about adaptation and the role of infrastructure for adaptation, which is critical. So I think it really helped us from those points of view.
Yeah. So while as most players at Baku looked for takeaways, you're the one who really made a contribution. Just how did it all come about and what was it like?
So, we're doing a lot of things at the coalition. And what we try to do is that we try to think about certain milestones that align with these, COP and other major global events, G20, etc. So for COP, we had targeted that, we have a significant program to support small island developing states. We actually launched a call for proposals. We invited countries to apply for grant funding. This year, we basically said we will be announcing winners from the second call. So we already committed $8 million of funding, which we're receiving from India, European Union, Australia, and the United Kingdom, to support island states. And these are small island states that are very vulnerable to climate change. So we had already made a call, invited countries to apply for grant funding for up to a $8 million cap. We made the announcements of who actually would receive that funding at COP. So in a way, this became a great milestone for us. While people are talking about, adaptation is important, adaptation is critical, climate change has to be addressed, funding, we were actually in a position to say we are already through the coalition offering grant funding to these small island states, to look at issues like early warning, look at issues like coastal infrastructure, water management. And I think that was a very successful announcement on our end.
Disaster resilient infrastructure is not a very popular or a common kind of a term. But did it figure in any other conversations there apart from the ones you led or supported?
So, in various ways it did. And while we were, of course, centrally focused on DRI, so our pavilion was for all DRI pavilion, there were a lot of conversations going on in other pavilions. So, for example, I participated in a pavilion organized by the Financial Times and the World Bank, where I made a pitch for resilient infrastructure. They were around UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, had organized a session on, the role of infrastructure. One of the topics was role of infrastructure to address climate change. There was something in the Green Zone organized by the Trade and Investment House Pavilion. The Bloomberg had invited me to talk to some of their people. So we were getting, not only in our pavilion, but also in other pavilions, our team was getting pulled to talk about this agenda. So others were interested to host conversations. AIIB had invited us to be keynote on urban resilience. So, that's a pretty long list of others who had actually recognizing the importance of DRI invited us as the coalition who speaks for DRI to sessions that they were organizing. So it was quite a rich tapestry of our sessions as well as sessions in other places where we spoke about DRI.
There's no progress on global goal on adaptation. How does that really impact disaster resilient infrastructure or DRI?
So, I take the long view because infrastructure by default requires very long-term thinking, right? And what we are trying to do is we are trying to make the argument for, through doing on the ground technical work, we're making the argument for looking at aspects of infrastructure that address climate risks. So I'll give you an example. You're building a road, probably in an area that is prone to flooding, and that flooding may be, contribution to that flooding may come from climate change. So what we're trying to do is how do you address your risks in the climate space, in your infrastructure space, to recognize future risks from climate change? And how do you then create a project that tomorrow can be supported by funds and other instruments that get available to address adaptation? So today, there's a lot of conversation at global level on what needs to be done. What we are trying to do is that through our work on the ground, we're already starting to demonstrate what can be done and getting these infrastructure projects, getting these countries that are building infrastructure or upgrading infrastructure to be ready. That when the larger discussions reach a point of saying, okay, there is funding now available, or we have to meet certain targets, there's already a plethora of projects ready that can tap into those sources. So that's how we are approaching it.
New climate finance goal of $300 billion annually by 2035 has been decided as of now. So what is in it for DRI specifically?
So, I think this is where, again, my previous answer, DRI, when you think about adaptation, it affects a lot of different sectors, including infrastructure, like critical infrastructure. So I just use the example of road, but similarly, better water management. You need to build your power sector to be resilient to cyclones. So there's an intersectionality between what is adaptation and infrastructure, but that is not very clearly articulated or understood. And what we are trying to do is, for example, we did a study in the coast of Odisha where we've looked at how coastal in power sector is going to get affected by changing wind speeds. Now, those changing wind speeds are related to climate change. A certain significant proportion of that is related to climate change. What we are able to say is that you need to upgrade this infrastructure. To upgrade this infrastructure, there's a certain cost. That cost potentially is adaptation. So we are actually taking a lot of our work down to that level to say, and when that $300 billion gets allocated, there will be a significant component of that will have to go for infrastructure. Now, this infrastructure could be existing infrastructure that is upgrading, or this infrastructure could be infrastructure that is to make communities more resilient. So, for example, coastal communities that are maybe going to see sea level rise, going to see more coastal erosion, that are going to see more cyclonic activity, may require infrastructure to make the communities more resilient. And the 300 billions could go, some of that portion could go towards that infrastructure. So, what we are trying to do is identifying all of those uh, intersectional points between where infrastructure will actually support resilience, particularly for adaptation.
Going forward, what would be your plans now, long term, informed by the Baku discussions and the global discourse as we know it's going to dominate for next 5 years, 4 years actually now with the global scenario as it is?
Yeah, so I think for us, we are very centrally positioned to be the champions of DRI. I think that mandate, that support from countries, that thinking, the brand building for DRI, setting us on the global stage is happening, and it's happening both through COPs, also through other work that we're doing. At G20, we were the partner who supported G20 on DRI. We put together, best practices on DRI. So we are positioning ourselves to be seen as the leader today, tomorrow, and day after. I think that's one thing. But through that, what we are also trying to do is, bring sharpness to the importance of this agenda for climate change. I think there is still, if you go and ask a traditional infrastructure provider, planner, implementer, there is not enough of an understanding of how do you incorporate risk reduction in your planning, particularly risk reduction related to climate uncertainties. And we are trying to, through all of the work that we're doing, we're trying to get much more sharper on that particular message, that if you're building your infrastructure, upgrading infrastructure, how do you understand your future risk, particularly related to climate change? And what do you need to do to address it? And that could include codes and standards, that could include capacity of individuals, that could include, training to make sure that in a building infrastructure, you're recognizing these risks. That could include data. We're spending time in all of those dimensions with the intention that the next 3, 4, 5 years, this topic will get a lot more visibility, and we want to be at the forefront of those discussions. So we'll of course be at COP. We'll in Brazil. We not just Brazil, but even subsequently. But even in other forums, we'll continue to talk about the importance of this agenda. Publishing data around it. We came out with the report last year that was significant in this discussion. We have again this year, in 2025, we launched the second version of that report, essentially giving an economic justification also of why we can not afford to lose our infrastructure by not understanding risks. So that's really where we're headed now.
Now, would you be also going in for a membership drive, because you have lots of members already, but there's lots of scope for expansion now from all the sectors? Your thoughts on
so
that?
we absolutely will be. So we right now have 40 countries that are members in 7 organizations. We have made a commitment that by the end of 2026, we want to have 75 countries that are members of the coalition. So we will definitely be making a very active drive. Again, so far we've not, we've used various channels, but we've not very actively sought membership. We've been lucky that various programs are bringing in members. We added 7 members from island states, for example. That's directly related to the SIDS work that we're doing. We definitely are going to make a push for adding membership in Africa, as well as Southeast Asia. These are, Southeast Asia is very highly vulnerable to climate change. Vietnam has just joined us, so our 40th member is Vietnam. We're in conversations with several countries there in that region to add members. And then in Africa, we're going to have, I think by the next early part of next year, we will have an Africa strategy that we are putting together. So to build membership, but also to provide technical assistance on the African continent.
How much are you focusing on raising more funding for your work now? I mean, the work is only going to expand more.
Yeah, so we will start towards the end of this 2025. We will start really going, and we've been lucky that Government of India has given us reasonable amount of funding, which has then allowed us to raise funds from others. So we still have, for the next few years, sufficient funding to really build these programs. But we're also conscious that by the end of next year, we will actually start doing much more. We'll start fundraising in a very active manner. We've so far never done it actively, but now, end of next year, we'll start doing it actively.
What about your engagement with the private sector? Is it really?
So it's been a little bit slow, and I think part of it is because we are still focusing on getting the government sectors to recognize the importance of the agenda. Private sector at the end of the day will only come if government starts to indicate to them that you need to do something about it. So we are doing some, like at COP, we've actually launched a couple of publications as well. For example, with BCG, we did a joint publication on the importance of resilient infrastructure in the transportation sector in South Asia. So we jointly put this document together, and it's intended for an audience that includes both public and private sector. We're still working to see how governments can then start to have those discussions with the private sector to say, is it through regulation? Is it through financial instruments? End of the day, the private sector builds infrastructure, but they're also building it for profit.
Right.
If risk is something that is not very clearly understood and addressed, there is a financial commitment to addressing risk. And there is an ongoing discussion, larger discussion, saying who should pick up that additional cost of resilience. Is that a government sector's role of picking it up so that the private sector can still continue to function in the way they need to function? So those are still very, I would say, those are emerging discussions. I may have a better answer next year or the year after, but we're starting to think along those lines as well.
It was wonderful talking to you and getting a sense of what the kind of work you're doing and the kind of traction your work has got. Thanks a lot for spending time.
Thank you so much for having me.
We hope you like this program. We look forward to your feedback on our WhatsApp number 9818120554. For participation in this program, write to us at sustainability.karma@gmail.com. You may also connect with us on social media. This podcast is also available on podcast hosting sites. Looking forward to meet you again at the same time next week with a new episode and a new guest. Till then, goodbye from all of us. Sustainability Karma, a podcast series on sustainable development, sustainability, and ESG.